Hey, welcome to the Financer Studio. Today I want to show you how to put together this black and gold organic balloon garland on top of a circle backdrop frame. I'll show you how to make each element and assemble it into this gorgeous backdrop. So let's get into the studio and start inflating some 11-inch and 16-inch black latex balloons. Now I'm going to inflate both of these at the same time, and I want to make sure when I'm doing this, I always put the larger balloon on the trigger nozzle side of my inflator, so that way I can pull the smaller balloon off once it's full, but keep running that inflator until the bigger balloon is all the way full. Then I'm going to let a little bit of air out of this large balloon and press down on it so it's nice and round. Then I'm going to tie the two of them together into a pair. So take one of the nozzles, wrap it around the other one twice, and tie it together in a simple knot. I'm going to tie all of my latex balloons into pairs and then into clusters, which will be the building blocks of our balloon garland. So each cluster will have one 16-inch balloon, and the rest of those balloons will be made up of 11-inch latex balloons inflated to anywhere between 7 inches and 10 inches in diameter. So once I've got 4 of these pairs created, I'm going to bring them together into a cluster. So take 2 of them and overlap them so that the nozzles touch in the center, and then twist one balloon from each of those pairs around it, locking it into a quad. To this quad, we're going to add one more pair, making sure the nozzles of that new pair are touching the nozzles of the quad. Bring those 2 new balloons all the way around so they're touching, and then twist them around each other. This creates a 6 balloon cluster, and I made 3 of these for my garland, but then I also added one more pair to some of these clusters, so in total I had 5 of these 8 balloon clusters, and having clusters in 2 different sizes allows me to blend the colors of my garland in a more organic fashion, and it won't look so much like stripes alternating back and forth. In a similar fashion, I'm going to create clusters using these gold metallic balloons. Now I don't have any 16-inch gold metallic balloons, so I'm really going to focus on just inflating my 11-inch balloons to various sizes before tying them together into clusters. And just like the black balloons, I'm going to create 3 6-balloon clusters and 5 8-balloon clusters. Now let's focus on creating our accent balloons. I'm going to start by inflating these 7-inch chrome metallic gold balloons to 10 pumps of air or 6 inches in diameter. I'll be inflating these 2 at a time, so I'm going to take the first balloon and wrap the nozzle of that under one of my fingers that's holding onto the balloon pump while I inflate the second balloon to the exact same size. Now if you're not confident inflating your balloons 2 at a time like this and tying them directly into pairs, you can always inflate them 1 at a time and tie them in a knot before tying them into the pair. Once we've made 4 of these pairs, we're going to tie them together into quads. So take 2 of those pairs, overlap them so that the nozzles touch, and then twist the balloons around each other. Repeat this so you've got 2 quads that look just like this, and then we're going to tie them together with half of a 260 balloon. So I just took a regular 260, cut it in half because we don't need that full length, and then I'm going to tie 1 balloon quad to each end of this 260. You can do this by either taking the end of the 260 and tying it directly to one of the nozzles of the quad, or the faster method, which I like to do, is to pinch the end of that 260 against the nozzles of that quad, stretch the 260 out tight, and wrap it in a figure 8 pattern around 2 balloons a couple times, and that will secure it to the quad. I'm going to do the exact same thing on the other end, creating this stretchy balloon cluster. Having the 260 between these balloons will make it super easy to attach this to our balloon garland later. So I'm going to make 4 of these and then do the exact same thing with some 5-inch black balloons that I've inflated to 4 pumps of air each and tied together in the same way, so I've got 4 black ones as well. The second kind of balloon accent I'm adding to the garland are these starburst balloons, and these are usually 12-point stars made from these mylar balloons, but they actually come in these individual tapers that we have to inflate and tie together to create those stars. So I'm going to put a couple pumps of air into this, and this one's great because it has a self-sealing valve, so I don't have to get a heat sealer out to create this star. Once I've got each of these tapers fully inflated, I'm going to take 6 of them and tie together all of these little tails. So I'm going to hold them in one hand right at the base of that tail against the bottom of the balloon and gather all 6 of those together until I've assembled half of a star. Because the starburst is coming out of my garland and I'm not hanging it freeform, I only need half of these balloons so it looks like it's coming out of the garland and not just sitting on top. So once I've got all 6 of them gathered, I'm going to twist those nozzles around each other and secure them together as a group using an empty 260. So I'm just going to lay the center of that 260 right on top of my thumb that's holding all those balloons together, stretch the tail end of that 260 nice and taut, and wrap it around the balloons a couple times between the base of the balloon and my fingers that are holding the tails. Then I'm just going to tie the 2 ends of that 260 around each other into a knot and leave the tails long on this because we'll use the end of the 260 to tie these starbursts into the garland. I'm going to make a couple of these starburst groupings before moving on to creating our final accent balloon, and that's these gold foil boba balloons. Now if you want a full tutorial on how to make these, I'll have that linked in the description box below, but I've made a couple of these and I'm just attaching an empty 260 to the nozzle of that so I can easily tie it into the garland. I loaded all these balloons up into my vehicle and headed over to the ballroom. So I'm going to assemble the garland first and tie all of my clusters together using empty 260s. And I'm going to take my first 260 and tie the end of it to one of the nozzles of my first cluster. Once I've got that tied in, I can then start adding clusters to this. So I'm going to take my second cluster, snug it right up against the first, and stretch that 260 up tight so it's right against the nozzles of that second cluster, and then wrap it in a figure 8 pattern around 2 of the balloons in that cluster, and that will secure it in place. From there, I'm going to keep adding clusters in the same way, making sure I alternate my colors around so it doesn't end up looking like a striped pattern. The first 2 clusters I used, one was an 8 and the other one was a 6. I followed that up with 2 8 cluster gold ones before moving back to black. Now as you add your clusters and you get to the end of your 260, simply tie another one to the very end and you can keep going as long as you'd like. Now I'll be attaching this to my circle backdrop, which you can see behind me there, and it's 7.5 feet in diameter, and I want my balloon garland to extend beyond that frame. So in total I tied 10 of these clusters end to end, which gave me about 10 feet in length overall for this main body of the balloon garland. Once I got to the end of that, I took whatever was left of the 260 and wrapped it in a figure 8 pattern around a couple balloons, and that'll keep it all tied together. Then I'm going to hold it up to my frame, and once I'm happy with the placement on the circle backdrop, I'm just going to snug the balloons right onto the frame so that the frame is touching the nozzles of a balloon cluster or right against the 260 balloon running down the center of the garland. Once I was happy with its placement on the frame, I then took an empty 260 balloon and wrapped the tail end of that around a couple of balloons, wrapped the balloon around the frame, and then around a couple more balloons before tying it in a knot. And this will keep the garland secured to the frame, and I don't have to worry about it accidentally popping off if someone brushes against this backdrop. Now we can focus on filling out the garland. So I'm going to take the leftover clusters I have, tie a 260 into each of those, and then I'm going to start placing these anywhere I want to widen that garland. To attach these, I'm going to snug it right up against the main body of the garland, stretch out that 260, and wrap it around a couple of balloons from the main portion of that garland in a couple different places. As I continue to add clusters to the main body of the garland, I'll also take that 260 and wrap it around not only the main body of the garland, but the clusters that I've added on next to it. By wrapping the 260 balloon around so many different sections of the balloon garland, it creates this web of support that will keep our balloons from flopping around and moving in ways we don't want them to. Once I've got all the clusters attached to the garland and I've moved them around and I'm happy with the general placement of them, it's time to finally start adding the accent balloons to this garland. Starting with those mini balloon clusters, I'm going to place the first half and then take that 260 and wrap it behind some of the balloons before placing the other half of that balloon cluster. The important thing with these tiny clusters is just making sure that 260 is out of sight, whether that's behind one balloon or wrapped around multiple balloons to get those tiny clusters placed exactly where you want them. Next, I'm adding in the gold foil bobos as well as the starburst balloons, and these 2 balloons are very eye-catching, so I want to make sure that we evenly distribute these balloons across the garland and we don't get them too close together, as it can be really confusing for the eye. Both of these accents go into the garland really easily because of the 260 we already attached to these balloons, so I'm simply stretching out the tail and tying it to a couple balloons right behind behind it. Now my garland was sagging just a little bit in the middle, and I wanted to be able to control how it was sitting. So I took a little bit of fishing line and tied it to the top of my circle arch and secured it in place with a little bit of tape. Then I took that fishing line and brought it straight down to where it would touch the main body of that balloon garland and wrapped it around a couple of those balloons, making sure I was happy with the placement before I wrapped it snugly in a figure eight around a couple of those before trimming away any excess fishing line. As a finishing touch, I took a couple strings of mini fairy lights and wove it in and out of the balloons to give it a beautiful twinkle on the back of this stage. I finally had a custom sign that was made for this event attached to the frame, and this backdrop was ready for the program. If you'd like to see me set up the rest of this ballroom as well as a behind the scenes look at the day of an event planner, you should join my Patreon. My patrons get to see behind the scenes glimpses of projects I'm working on, access to digital plans, as well as answering their direct questions about party planning. So until the next video, remember, stay creative everybody! Bye!